Hi, kitty cats. Welcome to the Identify Yourself live streaming show. I am Amethyst Herrick. I'm an author and a podcaster, and I hope you will check the links below for more information about me and then the work that I do. My personal website's the top one, amethysta.io. You will find all of my social media networks, and I hope that you will follow me and get the updates on everything I do. My professional website is the bottom one, which is genderidentitytoday.com. You will find all the writing that I do, all my articles, all my podcasts, all of that's published there. And we also accept work from other contributors. So if you like this content, I hope you will subscribe at genderidentitytoday.com because you can get a subscription for as low as $2 a month. And if you'd like to contribute content to Gender Identity Today, please contact me through my personal website contact page. All right, so today what I'm doing is answering community questions. I got two really good ones. The first one comes from Angel7, and her question is just, how can we be better allies for the LGBTQ community, especially when we're looking at Pride Month? Because here we are in June. How do we become better allies? The answer I want to give, actually, I heard Bianca Lewis. She was my first transgender mentor. I heard Bianca give this answer a couple of years ago, and it was a really good answer. Her point was that as transgender people, we have to come out all the time. Because this could be somebody realizes you're transgender. Not all of us have the ability to live in stealth. Somebody asks about your past. Like I was once asked, hey, what was it like growing up as a girl in the 1970s? And I went, Or maybe somebody asks about relationships. Are you married? And you say, well, sure, my wife. I recognize this applies to other letters in the rainbow for sure. Because if you're gay, if you're a lesbian, or even bisexual, you may be asked about relationships. And if you're just in general gender fluid, like there's no doubt if somebody asks you, are you a boy or a girl, you have to talk about yourself. We continually have to confirm our identities. And sometimes this happens even on a daily basis, which is a bummer. But this is fallout of living in a cisgender and heterosexual normative society. There are others who may begrudge this. I don't. I recognize this happens. There's a reason why our society is cishet normative, and I'm not going to go into that now. And I'm not going to say it's good. I do understand it happens. Part of what my mission is to challenge that. And just to say that identity is a normal part of being human, normal part of the human experience. So, with this as a preface, let me actually talk about how people who are in the cishet normative world can support the rainbow better. I gave that background for a reason, and I gave it because when the answer that Bianca gave, I'm going to echo it pretty closely, which is just to say it's really impossible to be a good ally. The war, if we were going to turn this into a military allegory here, the war is not primarily about other people believing that the queer experience is valid. The war typically is more about us believing that we are valid and worthy of existing, because it's difficult. You get into a cishet normative environment, and when you have to continually affirm your identity, you start to wonder, am I valid? Is my identity valid? Did I come up with something really weird that now, I'm going off this big deep end? So the war is really more about us. It's not about the rest of society, although there is no doubt, and I'm not going to diminish this, there is no doubt that part of the reason why I use the word cishet normative is because there are people who are trying to push this being a normative experience. So, obvious ways that you can support the LGBTQ community, Angel. First of all, there's the obvious, fight legislation that perpetuates the belief that the queer experience is not valid. If you believe that gender is something ultimately that we have to develop on our own and that is not a biological inbred kind of thing, we need to challenge this. That could be done in many ways. It could be helping people understand. You could point them to resources. You could point them to, I don't know, maybe Gender Identity Today. There's a lot of information on there about the distinction between sex and gender. You could do a lot of things just to battle this legislation and to battle the idea, the very idea that cisgender and heterosexual is normal. Because really what we're talking about is not normal, but common and frequent. Something that happens often, but just because something happens often doesn't mean that it is correct. And I have a great example of that if you want. It turns out, I don't know the exact statistic, but I believe greater than 50% of people in the United States are considered at least overweight. So at least overweight. I believe it might go into obese, and I don't remember. But that would mean, if it's greater than 50%, that it should be normal, right? But the human body actually doesn't perform very well when it's obese. So it's not normal. It is not the normal human experience, but it is absolutely common and frequent that we can see. Just because it is common and frequent to see somebody who is cisgender and who is heterosexual does not make it normal, does not make it right. It only makes it common and it only makes it frequent. So, battle that legislation, battle that perception that the queer experience is not valid. Angel, you brought up the idea of cheerleading, and that's really good. Helping somebody by reminding them that they're valid, reminding everybody you can think of that their identity and that their gender belongs to them alone and that they are valid, that goes a really long way. A very, very long way. Part of that, and I know I might get pushback on this, is just respecting pronouns. I had a conversation yesterday where somebody said, I can't believe that somebody would ask me my pronouns because don't I look like a woman? And the answer is yes. But it's not about how each of us looks and whether or not we should continue to perpetuate social expectations around gender roles. It just has to do with being a respectful person in general. Don't assume you know somebody's pronouns. And really, it's not a bad idea to tell somebody yours. Somebody once asked me, how am I supposed to ask for pronouns? And I said, well, here's what you do. You go, hi, my name's Amethysta. My pronouns are she, her. What pronouns do you use? It's pretty dang easy. At the end of this, really, I think what we have to say is you don't want to get into a major battle. That's not worth it. There are places where it's going to be unsafe to ask somebody, to respect the queer experience. There are places where it may not be safe. You don't have to get into a battle, but you can respectfully disagree with anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and at least show that the war is a lot more complicated than some might think. So, Angel, that was a great question. I gave you kind of a hedgy answer, and I apologize. I hope that was good for you. I hope that worked for you. So we'll move on to my next question. This is a really good one, and it was actually something I had to do some research. I always love doing research. So the question is, why do I have to, because I have yet to do it, why do I have to discontinue hormone therapy so long before surgery? And this came from Bianna Lawrence, so thank you, Bianna. I was asked to discontinue my hormone therapy, my estradiol valerate injections, 4 weeks before surgery. So that means I actually have to do this. I have to start, I guess I have to stop. I have to discontinue my hormone therapy next Thursday. And I have a couple of videos about how nervous I am about that because I know what it was like living my life under the influence of testosterone. And it was not a really grand time. And so I'm nervous about this. I'm curious. Am I going to end up getting a bunch more testosterone? Am I going to see gains that I've made from hormone therapy go away? Am I going to turn into the jerk that I kind of was? I'm concerned about this. I'm worried about this. And so this is a topic that's very close to my heart. So I had to do research on this. What I had heard before, or the information that I had been given before, is that hormone therapy comes with it the risk of higher blood pressure and blood clots. And that's all I knew, so I had not followed up on that. But it did always bring to mind this question that if it's true for transgender women, and if human biochemistry is largely independent of the XX and XY genotype, how is it that humans assigned female at birth can even have surgery? Because wouldn't they always be at high risk? Wouldn't they have the same concerns if the problem is not being transgender, but rather blood concentration of estrogen? So it turns out, so I went and did my research, it turns out there are three different ways to introduce estrogen into a woman's bloodstream. The first is pretty obvious. It's just natural production of estrogen from ovaries and from the pituitary gland. I believe. Boy, I hope I have that right. Just natural production of estrogen that the human body can do. There's also bioidentical estradiol, and that's delivered in a way typically vaginally or oftentimes vaginally. But if you're a transgender woman, frequently what you get is synthetic estradiol. And these are delivered as injections, like I inject estradiol valerate. There are other estradiol salts, and some, you'll get that on patches and stuff as well. So there are 3 different ways to introduce estrogen in women. It turns out that the synthetic estradiol is the only concern. If you are producing estrogen naturally, that's okay. If you have a bioidentical introduction of estradiol, you're also cool. It's really only the synthetic estradiol that is a concern, which tends to target transgender women because we typically need much higher doses of estradiol to induce, feminization. That's why we do it. So the synthetic estradiol can raise blood pressure. It comes with it the risk of raising blood pressure, but it also brings with it the risk of blood clots. And this is really only the synthetic. Again, especially when you have this in conjunction with an anesthesia, with a general anesthesia. Primarily what my surgeon and what most reconstructive surgeons are concerned about is something called deep venous thrombosis. And what this is a blood clot, typically deep in the legs, usually in the calf. The risk there is that any blood clot, regardless of its place in the body, can fragment. And so if it falls apart, there's the possibility that a fragment can actually make it to your brain. And you have capillaries in your brain where a fragment of a blood clot could block that capillary and induce a stroke. Now, for obvious reasons, surgeons would like to minimize this risk to their patients. Presumably, that makes sense. In my case, there were other complications. Now, when I decided I was going to go to Thailand and I found a surgeon, I presented with a high body mass index, a high BMI. Now, my tissues are dense, just like my head, but my BMI puts me in a category that is considered moderately obese. And maybe you look at me and go, okay, probably not. Now, regardless of the justice in this measurement, a high BMI also increases the risk of deep venous thrombosis. And usually that happens because if you have a thicker leg, there's a greater risk of having a blood clot. So if it's a bigger, like an actual bigger or round leg, there's the greater chance that the weight could cause capillaries to get squished. And there you go. You might end up with a blood clot. So that is the biggest reason why surgeons would want somebody to reduce their estradiol intake before surgery. Now, time frame is interesting because Bianna brought up that your body processes estrogen rapidly, and that's true. As far as time frame goes, I have seen anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 6 weeks. I was asked to discontinue 4 weeks before, and presumably, again, this is for my high BMI. If you had maybe a lower BMI, maybe you will get 2 weeks. And I do know of at least one person who was asked only for 3 days before. It is true that the body processes estradiol relatively quickly, but it also depends on the delivery that the way that the estradiol is delivered. I happen to inject estradiol valerate intramuscularly. When you put that into a muscle, it actually diffuses out into the rest of the body somewhat slowly. And now what that means is that I have in both my thighs here, where I inject, little reservoirs of estradiol valerate, higher concentrations of estradiol valerate that still has to diffuse away outside of those muscles. So I actually have kind of a slow release system. So even though I will process what's currently in my bloodstream quickly, I will still release more estradiol valerate into my bloodstream slowly. And that, ultimately, to be completely safe, the surgeon would like me to wait a long time. And presumably this is where the 2 week time frame comes from. I don't know why somebody only got asked to discontinue 3 days in advance. I don't know. It would be another interesting piece of research to do. I do have a friend who was asked to discontinue estradiol use for 6 weeks. And this was because she had a previous history of blood clotting during surgery. In fact, if I remember correctly, I believe she had a mini stroke, and so that elevated her risk of complications during surgery. So that's that whole thing. I still don't really like the idea of waiting 4 weeks to get my estrogen back, but this is what I got, so I will take it. So Bianna, hopefully that answered your question as thoroughly as possible. All right, well, I'm about 20 minutes in here. That was about all I had to discuss. Again, my name is Amethyst Herrick, and I hope you will check out the links down below there. Check out my personal website. Please follow me on social media. Please follow me here on YouTube. I also have videos up there on TikTok, and I have a playlist called Emmy in Thailand because I'm heading off to Thailand for gender-affirming surgery. And then again, if you would like to read more about all the work that I do, genderidentitytoday.com is the place that you're going to want to go. And that's it. I'm actually going to be doing another live stream on Saturday because I have a totally different question to discuss. But I will say thank you very much for your attention, and I will see you Saturday. Bye.